They say the most dangerous people are the ones you never see coming. The ones who blend into the wallpaper, the ones who anticipate the printer jams before they happen, the ones who know where the spare toner is kept, and, more importantly, the ones who document everything. My name is Gina, and for 12 years, I was that person at Viridian Dynamics. Not a flashy title, not a corner office, not even a window view. I was the executive assistant to Sam Stern, Senior Vice President of Global Synergy Operations. Which, if you ask me, was just a fancy way of saying he was in charge of making sure everyone else in his department felt miserable and insignificant. And for 12 years, I made sure his world ran like a perfectly oiled, albeit deeply unethical, machine. I knew Sam's schedule down to the minute. I booked his flights, his hotels, his ridiculously expensive organic lunches. I fielded his angry calls, filtered his nonsensical demands, and translated his corporate jargon into something vaguely resembling human communication. I was the invisible scaffolding holding up his entire professional facade, and I was good at it. Damn good. Better than good, actually. I was, dare I say, essential. But essential, in the corporate world, often means invisible until something breaks. And then, suddenly, you're not essential, you're just the person who should have prevented the breakage. Viridian Dynamics. The name itself sounds polished, doesn't it? Like a freshly buffed piece of chrome. They sold themselves as innovators, as disruptors, as the future. The reality, however, was a lot more rusty. Sam, my boss, was the poster child for Viridian's toxic underbelly. He was a man who measured success by the number of people he could belittle in a single meeting. He lived for the buzzwords, the synergistic alignments, the leveraging of core competencies, all delivered with a smug smirk that made you want to shove a whole banana down his throat. He was the kind of executive who would spend an hour explaining the importance of streamlining processes while simultaneously creating more bureaucratic hurdles than a medieval castle. My role as his EA was to navigate this minefield with grace and a perpetually serene smile. It sounds simple, but it requires a specific set of skills. You need to be a master of organization, a chameleon of emotional intelligence, and a psychic detective all rolled into one. You have to anticipate needs that haven't even formed in the executive's mind yet. You have to know when to speak up and, more often, when to stay silent. For years, I'd mastered the art of silence. I'd seen enough ethically dubious decisions to fill a corporate library, but I'd kept my head down. I collected my paychecks, I paid my bills, and I quietly did my job, and I documented. Oh, how I documented. It started subtly. A misplaced email that confirmed a questionable sourcing decision. A hushed conversation overheard about cutting corners on safety regulations. A Slack message from a Viridian supplier hinting at under-the-table payments. Little things, really, at first. I'd save them in a secure, encrypted folder on my personal cloud drive, a habit born from my journalism degree, a degree I'd pursued before corporate life swallowed me whole. You see, I'd always believed in the power of truth, and I'd always believed that the truth, no matter how inconvenient, would eventually come out. I just didn't expect to be the one to unearth it at Viridian. Sam, bless his delusional heart, seemed to think I was his personal doormat. He'd bellow orders across the open plan office, demand impossible tasks with zero notice, and generally treat me like a particularly unintelligent piece of office furniture. The kind that occasionally spilled coffee. He liked to boast about his ruthless efficiency, which I always interpreted as a polite euphemism for total disregard for human decency. The breaking point came during a Q3 planning meeting. Viridian was facing a potential dip in its stock price, and Sam, predictably, was looking for someone to scapegoat. He'd been pushing a new supplier for our critical component parts, a company called Apex Innovations. Now, I'd flagged Apex before. Their pricing was suspiciously low. Their safety certifications looked photocopied, and their CEO had a reputation for cutting corners like a toddler with safety scissors. I'd found internal reports leaked by a panicked former employee of Apex detailing shoddy manufacturing processes and falsified quality control data. So, when Sam stood up in that meeting, beaming like a proud peacock, and announced that Apex was going to be our new primary supplier, I did something I hadn't done in years. I spoke up. Sam, I began, my voice surprisingly steady, though my heart was doing a frantic samba against my ribs. Before we commit to Apex, I have some information that might be relevant. I have documentation suggesting their quality control is compromised. The room went silent. Not just quiet, but the kind of absolute deafening silence that swallows all sound. Sam's face, which moments before had been a picture of smug self-satisfaction, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. His eyes, usually narrowed in disdain, bulged with fury. He looked like a cartoon villain whose evil plan had just been foiled by a rogue teacup. Compromised, he spat, his voice a low, dangerous growl. What are you talking about, Gina? Are you questioning my judgment? Are you questioning my due diligence? I'm presenting factual data, Sam, I replied, pulling out a small encrypted USB drive from my pocket. I have reports. Evidence of their substandard practices. Practices that could put Viridian's reputation and its customers at significant risk. He snatched the USB drive from my hand, his knuckles white. He plugged it into his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed that was almost alarming. The room held its breath. You could practically hear the collective anxiety of 50 executives, all keenly aware that their bonuses depended on Sam's capricious mood. He scrolled through the files, his face turning a shade of puce that would make a stop sign blush. Then, with a guttural roar, he slammed the laptop shut. The sound echoed through the boardroom like a gunshot. You incompetent fool, he bellowed, his voice booming. You've sabotaged this company. You deliberately tried to undermine my efforts. This is insubordination of the highest order. He pointed a trembling finger at me. You're fired, Gina. Effective immediately. Get out of my sight. The shockwave rippled through the room. People exchanged wide-eyed glances, afraid to breathe, afraid to move. I felt a strange calm descend upon me. It wasn't fear, it was clarity. For 12 years, I'd been the quiet professional, the diligent assistant, the keeper of secrets. And for my reward, I was being summarily dismissed for doing my job, for trying to prevent disaster. I stood up, my legs feeling oddly light. I looked at Sam, his face a mask of petty tyranny, and then I looked at the HR representative, Brenda, who was already scuttling over with a pre-printed termination letter, her expression a practiced blend of sympathy and steely resolve. Brenda, who had always told me, in hushed tones, that it's at-will employment, Gina, you know how at Island. You can't just... I started, but Brenda cut me off, her voice smooth as Teflon. Gina, I understand this is difficult, she said, her eyes never quite meeting mine. But as Sam has stated, your actions were detrimental. We appreciate your service, but the company is moving in a different direction. Here's your severance package. It includes a standard non-disclosure agreement. Please sign here. The document was thick with legalese, designed to bury any hope of recourse under a mountain of corporate jargon. It offered a meager 3 months' pay and stipulated that I forfeit all rights to pursue any further action against Viridian Dynamics or its employees. It was an insult. A blatant attempt to silence me, to bury the truth along with my career. I looked at the document, then at Sam, who was now smirking triumphantly, basking in his manufactured victory. I looked at Brenda, her face a mask of corporate obedience. And I remembered that journalism degree. I remembered why I'd pursued it in the first place, the belief in truth, the desire to hold power accountable. I'll be taking all my personal belongings, I said, my voice calm and even, and I'll be leaving immediately. I didn't argue, I didn't plead, I just walked. Out of that boardroom, out of that department, out of Viridian Dynamics, leaving behind a trail of shocked faces and the lingering scent of burnt ambition. As I walked through the office, past cubicles filled with people who knew me, who relied on me, I saw the flicker of pity, the averted gazes, the silent understanding of how easily it could happen to them. The security guard, a man named Frank who I always made sure had a fresh cup of coffee in the morning, nodded sadly as he escorted me to the exit. He handed me a box for my belongings. A few personal items, a framed photo of my cat, a mug that said World's OKest EA, nothing that screamed high-value asset. Stepping out into the harsh afternoon sun, the Viridian Dynamics logo gleaming on the building's facade, I didn't feel defeated. I felt liberated. Sam thought he'd silenced me. Brenda thought she'd played by the rules. HR thought they'd covered their tracks, but they had made one critical, catastrophic mistake. They had fired someone who knew how to document. Someone who understood that the quiet accumulation of facts was a far more powerful weapon than any bellowed threat. I didn't go straight home. I drove to a quiet park, the kind with a view of the city skyline, a place where the noise of corporate injustice felt a little further away. I sat there for a long time, the box of my personal effects on the passenger seat. Sam had taken my USB drive, but he hadn't taken my memory. He hadn't taken my meticulous digital archive. He hadn't taken the skills I'd honed for years, both in journalism and in managing his impossible existence. I pulled out my personal laptop, the one that wasn't connected to Viridian's network, the one that was purely mine. I opened the secure, encrypted folder. It was all there. Every suspicious email, every falsified report, every overheard conversation about cutting corners, every single piece of evidence I had gathered over 12 years of quiet diligence. Sam thought he was firing an assistant. He had no idea he was unleashing a journalist. And this, my friends, was only the beginning. The setup was complete. Now it was time for the counterplay. And Viridian Dynamics, along with its petty, vindictive VP, was about to learn a very hard, very public lesson. They were about to discover that the quietest people often have the loudest stories to tell. The sterile scent of industrial cleaner clung to my clothes as I stepped out of Viridian Dynamics. The box in my hand contained the remnants of 12 years, a framed photo of my perpetually unimpressed cat, a chipped mug, a stress ball worn smooth by countless anxious squeezes. Sam, Brenda, HR. They'd orchestrated a tidy little exit, a footnote in their corporate saga. They thought they'd severed a connection, extinguished a threat. They couldn't have been more wrong. I didn't go home. I drove to a nondescript co-working space in a part of town where Viridian's influence barely registered. The kind of place with exposed brick, artisanal coffee, and a communal vibe that felt miles away from the hushed, power-brokering boardrooms I'd just left. Here, I was just another professional with a laptop and a deadline, but my deadline was different. My project wasn't to synergize or leverage, it was to dismantle. My personal cloud drive became my war room. For 12 years, I'd been meticulously documenting Viridian's descent into ethical rot and Sam's active participation in it. It wasn't just a hobby. It was a habit, ingrained by my journalism degree, a safeguard against the ephemeral nature of corporate memory. Emails flagged for questionable sourcing. I had them. Internal reports detailing safety shortcuts. I had them. Slack conversations hinting at illicit payments to suppliers like Apex Innovations. I had them. Not just snippets, but full chains, preserved with timestamps, sender and receiver information, and crucially, the context that Sam and Brenda would undoubtedly try to twist. I categorized everything. Financial discrepancies under budgetary irregularities. Supplier relationships under contractual ambiguities. Employee grievances dismissed by HR under systemic failures. Each folder was a carefully constructed brick, ready to be laid in a wall of irrefutable truth. I cross-referenced dates, identified patterns of negligence, and mapped out the interconnected web of deceit that had become Viridian's operational strategy. Sam's arrogance, Brenda's complicity, the board's willful ignorance, it was all there, laid bare in black and white. The first tremor hit within days. A colleague, Mark from procurement, a generally decent guy caught in the corporate churn, texted me late one night. "Gina, you won't believe this. Apex is demanding immediate payment for that Q4 shipment. They're saying we're 90 days overdue. Management is freaking out. Sam's not answering anyone." My heart gave a small, almost imperceptible flutter. This was it. The first domino. Apex's inflated invoices, their unsubstantiated claims of shipment delivery, I'd flagged them as potentially fraudulent months ago. Sam had steamrolled over my concerns, eager for the cost savings, blind to the risks. Then came a panicked mass email from Brenda, ostensibly to the entire department, but with a clear undercurrent of desperation. "Dear team, following up on the Q4 shipment discrepancies with Apex Innovations, we are actively working with our partners to resolve this matter and ensure continued operational efficiency. We appreciate your patience and understanding as we navigate this challenge." Brenda, always the master of corporate platitudes, was trying to spin a crisis. But the partners she referred to were the very ones I'd warned about. I saw another text message flash across my phone screen. Sarah from legal, a woman who'd always seemed a little too naive for Viridian's cutthroat environment. "Gina, are you sure about Apex? They're threatening legal action. Sam's bringing in outside counsel. This is getting ugly. Brenda's been in his office all day. I heard shouting." Shouting. That was Sam's usual response to being cornered. Brenda was likely coaching him on damage control, prepping him for the inevitable fallout. They were scrambling, blind to the fact that their problems weren't just about a single shipment, they were systemic. They thought firing me was the end of it. They thought my documentation ended with the USB drive Sam had snatched from my hand. They were wrong. I had a full, unredacted copy, secure and backed up. And I wasn't just sitting on it. My counterplay wasn't a single dramatic act, but a series of precise, calculated moves. I started small, using my personal email, carefully curated to appear as a concerned former employee seeking clarification. I sent polite, unassuming inquiries to regulatory bodies, not with accusations, but with questions. Dear Relevant Agency, my email read, sent to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. I am a former employee of Viridian Dynamics and have a query regarding standard safety protocols for industrial component manufacturing. I have some concerns about a supplier, Apex Innovations, and their adherence to safety certifications. Could you direct me to the appropriate resources for verifying such information or advise on standard inquiry procedures? To the Securities and Exchange Commission, I sent a similar, carefully worded email. Dear SEC Inquiry Department, I am seeking information regarding disclosure requirements for corporate supplier relationships, particularly concerning potential conflicts of interest or undisclosed financial arrangements. I previously worked at Viridian Dynamics and encountered situations where supplier dealing seemed irregular. Any guidance would be greatly appreciated. I didn't accuse, I didn't demand, I simply asked questions that would prompt official inquiries. Questions that would force Viridian to open their books, to justify their decisions, to expose the rot they'd so carefully tried to conceal. The impact was subtle at first, a hushed mention on an industry forum about a routine supplier audit at Viridian. A cryptic LinkedIn post from a Viridian executive lamenting unforeseen operational challenges. But the undercurrent of panic was palpable. They were being poked, prodded, investigated, and they had no idea how it was happening or why. Then came the email that truly signaled the trap was sprung. It was addressed to Sam, Brenda, and a select group of Viridian's senior leadership, and it was from the SEC. It wasn't a subpoena, not yet. It was a request for information, a formal inquiry into Viridian's relationship with Apex Innovations and their compliance with financial disclosure regulations. It specifically requested documentation pertaining to contracts, payments, and any due diligence conducted on Apex. I watched the timestamp of that email as it made its way through Viridian's internal servers from my old, now deactivated company account. I saw the chain reactions it would trigger. Brenda's frantic calls to Sam. Sam's blustering denials to anyone who would listen. The legal team scrambling to assemble a defense for a crime they didn't even fully understand had been committed. They were in trouble. Deep trouble. They knew something was wrong, that their carefully constructed facade was crumbling. They suspected an external threat, perhaps a competitor, perhaps a disgruntled ex-employee, but they still didn't know it was me. They still thought I was just the fired assistant, the insignificant footnote. They had no idea that the quiet observer had just unleashed a meticulously planned avalanche, and it was only the beginning. The ground beneath their feet was starting to shake. The phone rang at 7:17 a.m. I was already up, nursing a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in hues of orange and gold. My personal laptop was open, a secure channel to a financial news outlet, waiting for the story to break. Sam Stern's number flashed on the caller ID. The arrogant, entitled man who had summarily dismissed me, who had belittled my diligence, was now the one seeking me out, his pride buried beneath a mountain of mounting legal and financial pressure. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Gina speaking. I said, my voice calm, devoid of any emotion that might betray the satisfaction churning within me. Gina, it's Sam. His voice was strained, a grating rasp I hadn't heard before. The usual booming authority was replaced by a desperate tremor. We need to talk. About what, Sam? I asked, my gaze drifting to the Viridian Dynamics building, a distant, gleaming monolith on the horizon. I'm no longer employed by Viridian. This isn't about that, he snapped, his composure fraying. This is about Apex and the SEC. They've started an investigation. A serious one. They're asking for documents, contracts, proof of due diligence. And Brenda's gone silent. HR won't return my calls. That's unfortunate, I said, a carefully crafted tone of mild concern masking my glee. Sounds like a complicated situation. Complicated doesn't begin to cover it, Gina. They're threatening fines. Massive ones. And there's talk of legal action against the company. We're already seeing tremors in the stock price. Investors are panicking. He paused, his desperation palpable. We need your help. You were there. You handled the supplier accounts. You know everything. I know what I documented, Sam, I replied, taking a slow sip of my coffee. And I know what I saw. Viridian's ethics weren't exactly top tier under your leadership. Look, Gina, he pleaded, his voice dropping to a low, almost pathetic whine. We made a mistake, a huge mistake. We value your contributions tremendously. We're prepared to make it right. Significantly right. More than right. This was it, the moment of reckoning. The desperate gambit from the cornered executive. I could almost hear Brenda's voice in his ear, whispering sweet surrender. You want to make it right, Sam? I asked, my voice hardening slightly. Viridian Dynamics and Sam Stern have two options. Option A, you both resign immediately. Sam, you and Brenda. Publicly, an internal investigation will be launched, and the findings will exonerate me. Viridian will issue a formal apology and offer me a substantial bonus, compensation for my wrongful termination, and a role as Chief Compliance Officer. I will ensure no one else has to go through what I did. I let that sink in, the sting of resignation, the public humiliation, the loss of control. Option B, I continued, my voice now devoid of any warmth, is to ignore this, to continue denying, to fight the SEC. In that case, I will release all my documented evidence to every major financial news outlet, to every regulatory body I have contact with, and I will personally ensure that every single piece of this scandal becomes public knowledge. The consequences for Viridian Dynamics will be catastrophic. Fines, lawsuits, loss of all major clients, and likely the collapse of the company. Your reputations will be in tatters, Sam. You'll be pariahs in this industry. A heavy silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant hum of city traffic. Sam was clearly reeling, the magnitude of his miscalculation dawning on him. You can't be serious, he finally choked out. You'd destroy the company? I'm not destroying anything, Sam, I corrected him, my tone chillingly even. I'm exposing the rot that you and your cronies created. I'm ensuring accountability. You had your chance to do the right thing. You chose greed and arrogance instead. He mumbled something inaudible, likely an expletive or a desperate plea. I'll need confirmation of your decision within 24 hours, Sam, I said, my voice firm. Otherwise, I'll proceed with option B. The clock is ticking. I hung up, a sense of calm washing over me. The news about Viridian was already starting to leak. The financial news ticker on my laptop was a hive of activity, flashes of Viridian Dynamics under SEC scrutiny, and supplier irregularities at tech giant. The counterplay had done its work. Now, the endgame. The next morning, Brenda called. Her voice was a mixture of defiance and fear. Gina, Sam has made a decision. We're prepared to meet your terms. For option A. To be clear, Brenda, I stated, making sure she understood the gravity of the situation. Sam Stern and yourself are resigning, effective immediately. The board has been informed and has agreed to the terms. The public statement will be drafted by Viridian's legal team, and I will review it before it's released. I will also be appointed Chief Compliance Officer, and I will be given the resources and authority necessary to implement comprehensive ethical training and oversight across the company. Brenda, her voice now barely a whisper, confirmed. Yes, Gina, we understand. The following week was a whirlwind of legal negotiations and damage control for Viridian. The public statement was released, a carefully worded admission of oversight and a promise of reform. Sam and Brenda were gone, their names tarnished. The internal investigation, guided by the evidence I provided, confirmed the systemic issues, leading to broader changes within the company's structure. My return to Viridian was not as the meek assistant, but as the newly appointed Chief Compliance Officer. The corner office I never had was now mine, with a view that stretched across the entire city. My bonus was substantial, more than enough to erase the financial strain of my dismissal. But the real prize was the authority, the power to ensure that no one else would suffer the same fate. I implemented mandatory ethics training, revised supplier vetting processes, and established a transparent whistleblower system, ensuring that fear would no longer be the currency of compliance. The shame Sam and Brenda endured was a public spectacle, their careers effectively over. The company, stripped of its corrupt leadership, began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding its reputation, not on hollow buzzwords, but on genuine integrity. Watching the company transform from the inside, I felt a profound sense of purpose. My journalism degree, my meticulous nature, my quiet observations, they had all culminated in this. I hadn't just gotten revenge, I'd orchestrated corporate justice. I'd turned a wrongful termination into a systemic overhaul. And as I settled into my new role, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey. It was a testament to the power of diligence, the importance of bearing witness, and the quiet, devastating force of documentation. It proved that sometimes, the most significant victories are won not with grand gestures, but with carefully gathered facts, presented at precisely the right moment. If watching corporate hubris meet its match, and seeing quiet diligence triumph, resonates with you, consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories of justice served. Because in the complex, often corrupt world of corporate power, remember, the truth, meticulously documented, always finds its way to the light.